Huawei newly released its latest smartphone. In recent times, there has been significant controversy surrounding the use of 7nm semiconductors in Huawei Mate 60 from China. Upon closer examination of the latest model, it becomes evident that over 90% of its components originate from China. This underscores China's increasing self-sufficiency in the realm of semiconductors, with particular attention directed towards the application processor. Essentially the smartphone's brain, which is produced by SMIC, a Chinese company. This application processor employs a 7nm manufacturing process. To provide some context, a nanometer is equivalent to 1/1000th of a millimeter. Semiconductors are fabricated by etching electrical circuits onto silicon wafers, and the width of these circuit lines is measured in nanometers. Smaller nanometer values indicate a finer and more precise manufacturing process, allowing for the handling of more information and thereby representing a more advanced semiconductor. The semiconductor chips in question were manufactured using a 7nm process, which is considered highly advanced, especially when compared to the 14nm threshold. The United States has been actively implementing export sanctions to restrict China's access to advanced semiconductor technology. Since October of the previous year, these sanctions have targeted the export of semiconductor equipment to China capable of producing chips with a process node of 14 nanometers or smaller. The fact that Huawei has developed a 7nm semiconductor chip has raised significant curiosity about how it was accomplished. This has led to speculation that China has been proactively preparing for these U.S. sanctions on mass exports and has been actively exploring methods to circumvent them, enabling the production of more advanced semiconductors. Some argue that despite China's increasing technological independence, the nation's progress in technology remains constrained due to restrictions on importing semiconductor equipment. The production of 10nm semiconductors or smaller ones relies on the use of advanced equipment known as extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV. This technology becomes particularly crucial at the 7nm scale and beyond, and currently, the exclusive source of EUV machines is ASML, a company based in the Netherlands. None of this equipment currently exists in China because a Dutch company is also actively adhering to US sanctions on mass exports. Nonetheless, there is significant scrutiny on how China managed to produce 7nm semiconductors in the absence of this critical equipment. The machinery preceding the extreme ultraviolet exposure machine is known as a deep ultraviolet exposure machine, or DUV. It is possible to manufacture 7nm semiconductors using DUV, but the process efficiency is somewhat limited. This means that when producing semiconductors using DUV, there is a higher rate of defective products, and the proportion of qualified products decreases. Naturally, as efficiency decreases, production costs rise. This raises the question of how to create affordable smartphones when production costs are on the rise. There is speculation that the Chinese government is providing substantial subsidies to offset these increased costs. However, sustaining the production of advanced semiconductors without access to the advanced equipment known as EUV remains challenging. Consequently, some analysts argue that 7 nanometers may represent a practical limit. A widely held assumption is that the Chinese were able to circumvent sanctions and manufacture 7nm chips by importing advanced machinery before the year 2020. Indeed, TSMC Taiwan extensively utilized DUV, deep ultraviolet, equipment in the mid-2010s, which was the prevailing technology at that time. However, as they progressed toward more advanced semiconductor manufacturing processes, the use of DUV equipment became obsolete. Consequently, there has been a concerted effort to identify and recruit individuals who previously worked at TSMC and were involved in the production processes that relied on DUV equipment during that period. This strategic approach aims to leverage their expertise and knowledge in an endeavor to recreate and adapt that technology for current applications. Companies such as Samsung Electronics and SKhainix, which operate factories in China, are likely to be deeply concerned about this situation because the Huawei smartphone was discovered to contain DRAM and NAND flash components manufactured by SKhainix. This discovery prompted an investigation into SKhainics's involvement, particularly concerning their compliance with export sanctions. It's worth noting that the United States has imposed a ban on importing equipment capable of producing advanced semiconductors to China, which has significant implications for companies like SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics that operate factories in China. This ban has been in place since October of the previous year, making it necessary for these companies to already possess the required equipment within their production facilities. Initially, SK Hynix and Samsung were granted a one-year moratorium to continue their production activities until October of the current year. There were discussions about extending this moratorium, and the South Korean government had plans to request such an extension. However, in light of recent developments, there is growing uncertainty about whether this moratorium will indeed be prolonged.
이 콘텐츠가 도움이 되셨다면 다른 사람과 공유해 주세요. 좆대구알